powerful social media platforms, which have the capacity to influence elections and otherwise affect the quality of our democracy, are in private hands. And whether that's the private hands of Elon Musk or the private hands of a private equity company, in a sense, the problem is still the same.
Well, to discuss all that and more, I'm joined by Jamie Susskind, the author of The Digital Republic on Freedom and Democracy in the 21st Century, which has been described as a wise manifesto for digital democracy. Jamie, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me, Hugo.
Thanks very much indeed for being on. Look, you've written about the difficulty of government taming big tech and the challenges there. Musk buying Twitter would have made that quite a lot harder for governments, I think. So in some sense, you must be relieved by this.
Not especially, Hugo. I mean, the big worry that I have is that powerful social media platforms, which have the capacity to influence elections and otherwise affect the quality of our democracy, are in private hands. And whether that's the private hands of Elon Musk or the private hands of a private equity company, in a sense, the problem is still the same. These great vectors of democracy are being run solely for profit and sometimes without a great deal of thought about the public interest. I mean, I accept that there might be particular concerns relating to Elon Musk, although some people think he's great, some people disagree with him. For me, the bigger problem is that is the question about why very rich folks are able to buy such important things and run them according to their own whim in the first place.
Let's spell out exactly what the problem is here. There are competing views about what free speech on social media, on the internet generally, ought to involve. If these platforms do support unfettered free speech, why does it matter who they're owned by?
Well, there's no such thing as unfettered free speech, even in democracies. We draw lines. We don't allow fraudulent speech. We don't allow violent speech. We don't allow defamatory speech. And so anyone who decides how a social media platform runs is having to make decisions. They're having to make decisions about what may be said, who may say it, how it may be said. And they also make decisions about what kind of content gets amplified and spread to thousands or millions of people, and what kind of things fall under the radar and are never heard from again. And the combination of those powers means that what social media platforms do is that they place themselves between us, between me and you, between people, but also between us and the world's information. And they frame how we see the world and see each other. That is an immense and extraordinary and new power. And for many years, it kind of went unnoticed because people thought that the most interesting thing about social media platforms was that they let every one of us be a blogger, every one of us be a journalist. But it turns out that the real power is not so much in publishing stuff, sending the tweet, but deciding who sees the tweet and what rules govern that tweet. And if you're like me and you believe that the quality of the speech environment in a country is important for freedom and for democracy, and if you appreciate that there are difficult political questions about free speech, what should and shouldn't be said, then it doesn't seem to me wise in a great democracy to have those decisions decided in the closed boardrooms of private companies.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you've written specifically about the sort of absolute oddity of governments, and particularly the US government, sort of begging tech firms to rein in disinformation and partisanism during elections. In terms of governments having more muscle so they don't need to beg, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about rules, or are we talking about sort of nationalisation in the manner of how the railways used to be?
No one's talking about nationalization, and I think that's a good thing. There's no way you want the state owning and controlling the kind of great platforms of democratic speech. Even democratic countries, governments are sometimes tempted to meddle in free speech, and that's not something we want. But what the European Union is looking at, and indeed has passed some laws this week relating to, and indeed what the British Parliament is looking at, the UK Parliament, is regulating platforms by firstly categorizing them in terms of the risk they pose to society. So you've got big, dangerous ones and small, less dangerous ones, and then requiring them, depending on their size and risk, to have in place certain systems, let's say reasonable or appropriate or proportionate systems to deal with certain problems that might arise on social media, whether it's misinformation or something else, and then regulatory sanctions if they fail. So that's the kind of model of arm's length regulation that's being considered.
Okay. Had Musk taken over Twitter, Is it your view that he would have been no worse than anybody else, or worse than anybody else? I mean, is Musk a more maligned figure than Mark Zuckerberg? Is Zuckerberg a maligned figure? I mean, are these people who you think would have been equally easy for state or states or rules to rein in?
I'm going to slightly dodge the question because I think, and I say this on the first page of my new book, I think it's a question that obsesses us too much and it obscures the bigger question. The truth is, we might have had Mark Zuckerberg, we might have had Elon Musk, we might have had some great philosopher, king or queen, or we might have had some knave who wanted to use the social media platforms for ill purposes. The problem isn't the person who happens to be sitting in the driving seat at any given time. The problem is that you can get into the driving seat by virtue of being really rich. And in a democracy, we don't like the idea that money can be translated into democratic influence and power. And so, I don't have particularly strong views about Elon Musk or even Mark Zuckerberg, because I think the problem isn't them. The problem is the idea of Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, because, one day they will depart from the scene and someone else will replace them. And if we're still asking the question, oh, I wonder if they'll do the right thing, this new person, then I think that we're asking the wrong question, because we shouldn't have to rely on the wisdom or goodwill of anyone in these matters.
Let's talk about the specifics of Donald Trump being pushed off most forms of social media, because a lot of people thought that as a sort of a freewheeling libertarian, Musk might very well let him back on. First, I mean, I'm interested in your views about the banning of Donald Trump from Twitter and Facebook, but I'm also interested in your sort of your worldview about the greater sort of controls and regulation there should be. What gets done about somebody like Donald Trump? Because Trump, of course, responded to being banned from social media by setting up his own social media, and it seems to me that while it's relatively easy to establish a situation where we have laws that control extant social media companies, once you're moving into an area where you're sort of controlling what new websites people can start, that's all going to be much, much harder to do, not least because they can be based anywhere in the world. And that takes us into very different sort of arguments about freedom.
There's a number of different things going on there. The first is...
There's a lot, and apologies for my
chaotic
question.
So much. There's so much there. I mean, the first is, what do you do when someone like Donald Trump, with great resources at his disposal, starts a social media platform? I don't see that as, in principle, different from other social media platforms. You just have to categorize it as according to its risk, like any other. And it might be that a very new social media platform doesn't have much social risk and therefore shouldn't have much regulation. But as it grows in influence and effect, then it should be regulated more. Secondly, do I think there is a general rule about who should and who shouldn't be allowed on social media platforms? No, but I think that there should be rules. So let me put it this way. What made me uncomfortable about the removal of Donald Trump from Facebook was not the fact that it happened, but the fact that it was essentially a decision taken by Mark Zuckerberg using a very broad discretion. And I don't think when you're removing heads of state from the great public squares of digital democracy, I don't think it should be up to one guy. I think there should be a requirement for processes and rules and standards, so that there's a degree of consistency, which, yes, it should apply to Donald Trump just as much as it would apply to Donald Trump's adversaries. Because, there but for the grace of God go any of us. And as I say, the problem is not Donald Trump being removed, but the fact that actually anyone can be removed, and it might destroy their business, and it might destroy their social life, but they might be given no reason for it or no explanation by some invisible moderator in Silicon Valley somewhere. So I want to see not greater kind of rule of law principles applying to big decisions like that, so that, again, we're not all just sitting around biting our teeth wondering if the great king will do the right thing.
Right, understood. Yeah, I guess the essential sort of first principle of Elon Musk when he started talking about wanting to buy Twitter was that that speech online is broken because of excessive controls by the people who own websites, and he saw the solution to that being him owning the website and removing these controls, where thereafter it appears to have got more complicated. You sort of have almost like a similar objection to what's happening to speech online, but from completely the opposite direction. Do you think there's a possibility of any consensus between the likes of you and the likes of Elon Musk on this?
Maybe. I mean, let me put it this way. There are some people who think that social media platforms are overregulated, that they remove too much speech, that they stifle particular perspectives, that they crush dissenting views. There's also a very loud chorus of people who believe that social media is underregulated, so that it is a place festering with sexual harassment, racial abuse, misinformation, and political intervention by foreign states. What do these two people have in common, or these two groups have in common? And this is what I'm trying to work out in my new book. They're both making political arguments about how free speech should be structured on the internet. They disagree, but I think both groups, if they were being reasonable, would accept that what's happening is not a commercial debate about what's best for Twitter, but a political debate about what's best for society. And my answer to that, which I think should unify the two positions, is that where you have big political discussions and debates between competing perspectives, the appropriate place for the resolution of those debates is not the boardrooms of private companies, but parliaments and congresses. And our problem is that we have treated these matters for too long as purely matters of commerciality, and we've seen them as consumers, but we need to regard them as citizens. And I think implicit in both the very polarized positions I've just advanced, implicit is the understanding that actually we're in the realm of politics now. So let's treat it with the best political instrument we have, which is democracy.
Yep, understood. Well, thank you very much indeed. That's Jamie Susskind, the author of The Digital Republic on Freedom and Democracy in the 21st Century. And by the way, there is an interview with Elon Musk's sister Tosca in the Times Magazine today, talking about how they overcame their difficult childhood. In a few minutes' time, James Jackson joins me for the TV review, looking at Flintoff's Field of Dreams, The Baby, My Life as a Rolling Stone, and On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. So do get in touch if you have any thoughts of those. On those, text us on 87222, start your message with the word Times, tweet us at Times Radio, email us on studio@times.radio, and have those contacts ready as well for the theme tune quiz, which comes straight after the latest news and sport.